Nobody expected what happened after the prisoner finally left his cell. 3 months after Ethan Carter walked out of cell 47 for the first time in 7 years, Blackridge State Prison believed the nightmare was over. The tunnels had been sealed. Victor Hale had been arrested. The missing money had been recovered. The mystery of cell 47 had finally been solved. At least that was what everyone thought. Then one rainy evening, Officer Mark Lewis received a phone call that made his blood run cold. A maintenance worker had discovered something hidden inside Ethan's old notebook. At first, that did not sound important. Investigators had already examined every page. They had read every note, every clue, every date, every name, or so they believed. Mark rushed to the prison archives where the notebook was being stored. Several investigators stood around a metal table. The notebook lay open beneath a bright lamp. One of the investigators looked nervous. "You need to see this." Mark stepped closer. The investigator carefully lifted the back cover. Something had been hidden inside. A folded piece of paper. Nobody had noticed it before. Not once. Not during months of investigation. Not during hundreds of examinations. The paper looked old. Very old. Slowly, Mark unfolded it. A hand-drawn map appeared. His stomach tightened. The map showed Blackridge State Prison. But it was not the prison he knew. New tunnels appeared beneath the buildings. Entire underground sections were marked. Hidden rooms. Storage chambers. Passageways. Some areas stretched far beyond the prison walls. Mark stared in disbelief. "I've never seen this before." Neither had anyone else. But that was not the strangest part. At the bottom of the map, someone had written a message. The handwriting belonged to Ethan. Mark recognized it immediately. The message contained only 7 words. Cell 47 was never the real secret. Silence filled the room. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because if Cell 47 was not the real secret, then what was? Then Mark noticed something else. A date. A single date written beneath the message. October 18th. Tomorrow. The room suddenly felt colder. "What happens tomorrow?" one investigator asked. Nobody knew. But Ethan clearly expected something. Something important. Something dangerous. The next morning, Mark drove to a small town several hours away. Since helping investigators solve the Victor Hale case, Ethan had been moved to a lower security facility while cooperating with authorities. Mark needed answers. Immediately. When Ethan entered the visitor room, he seemed surprised. "I wasn't expecting you." Mark placed the map on the table. Ethan's face instantly changed. The color drained from his skin. For the first time in months, he looked genuinely frightened. "Where did you find that?" "It was hidden inside your notebook." Ethan closed his eyes. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered something. A single sentence. "I hoped nobody would ever find it." Mark leaned forward. "What does it mean?" Ethan stared at the map. "You need to stop looking." "That's not happening." "I'm serious." "So am I." The room became silent. Finally, Ethan spoke. "The tunnels under Blackridge are older than the prison." Mark frowned. "What are you talking about?" "They existed long before the prison was built." "Who built them?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know." "Then how do you know about them?" "Because Victor wasn't the first person using them." Mark felt a chill run through him. Everything they had uncovered in the first investigation suddenly seemed much smaller. Victor Hale had been hiding secrets beneath the prison. But perhaps those secrets belonged to someone else first. Someone older. Someone far more dangerous. "What happens tomorrow?" Mark asked. Ethan immediately looked away. His silence was answer enough. He knew. And he did not want to say. Mark pushed the map closer. "The date." Still no answer. "The message." Nothing. Finally, Ethan looked directly at him. His eyes showed something Mark had never seen before. Fear. Real fear. "The date isn't a warning." Mark's heart pounded. "What is it?" "It's an appointment." The words echoed through the room. An appointment. But with who? Before Mark could ask another question, a prison alarm suddenly sounded. Red lights flashed outside the visitor room. Officers began running through the hallway. The entire building erupted into chaos. Mark jumped to his feet. What happened? A guard rushed past the room. His face was pale. One of the inmates is missing. Mark frowned. Missing? The guard nodded. He vanished from a locked cell. Mark froze. The words felt familiar. Too familiar. Exactly like Ethan's disappearance from cell 47. Slowly, Mark turned toward Ethan. Ethan had gone completely white. Who is it? Mark asked. The guard looked down at a sheet of paper. Then he spoke the inmate's name. Mark felt every hair on his arms stand up. Because the missing inmate had been arrested only 2 weeks earlier. And according to investigators, he had never met Ethan. Never visited Blackridge. Never had any connection to cell 47. Yet his name appeared 3 times on the map hidden inside Ethan's notebook. And beside his name, someone had written 2 terrifying words. Do not follow. The words seemed to hang in the air. Do not follow. Officer Mark Lewis stared at the note written beside the missing inmate's name. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the prison alarm sounded again. Louder this time. The flashing red lights reflected across the visitor room walls. Outside, officers were running in every direction. The situation was quickly getting worse. Mark looked back at Ethan Carter. Ethan's face was pale. What does it mean? Mark demanded. Ethan swallowed. You need to leave. No. Mark, listen to me. What does the note mean? Ethan looked toward the window, as if expecting someone to be watching. Finally, he spoke. The man who disappeared. What about him? He wasn't supposed to arrive yet. Mark frowned. What are you talking about? Ethan leaned forward. The map wasn't tracking tunnels. Mark felt his stomach tighten. Then what was it tracking? Ethan hesitated. People. The answer made no sense. What people? The people connected to the real secret. Before Mark could ask another question, 2 correctional officers entered the room. The missing inmate situation had become a full emergency. All visits were cancelled. Everyone had to leave. As Mark was escorted out, Ethan called after him. Do not go underground. Mark turned. Ethan's expression was deadly serious. No matter what happens. The prison entered lockdown. Every cell was searched. Every corridor was inspected. Every camera recording was reviewed. The missing inmate's name was Daniel Brooks, 29 years old. Recently arrested for financial crimes. Nothing violent. Nothing unusual. At least on the surface. Yet Daniel had somehow vanished from a locked prison cell. No broken bars. No damaged door. No tunnel. No explanation. The similarities to Ethan's old disappearance were impossible to ignore. Late that evening, Mark sat in the prison security office reviewing footage. Hour after hour. Camera after camera. Then he found something strange. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the same time Ethan used to stare at the wall in cell 47, Daniel Brooks suddenly sat upright in bed. He looked directly toward the corner of his cell, as if someone was standing there. Then he slowly stood, walked toward the wall, and disappeared from view. Not because of a camera failure. Not because of a blind spot. The wall itself blocked the camera. 30 seconds later, Daniel never reappeared. Mark replayed the footage 5 times. His heart pounded harder each time. The next morning, investigators discovered something even stranger. Daniel Brooks had lied during processing. Several details from his background were fake. His employment records were fake. His address was fake. Even his driver's license contained false information. The man wasn't who he claimed to be. It was as if someone had created an entirely new identity for him. But why? Mark requested every file connected to Daniel. One document immediately caught his attention. A photograph. The picture showed Daniel standing outside a coffee shop 2 years earlier. Nothing unusual. Until Mark looked at the background. His eyes widened. Standing across the street was a familiar face. Victor Hale. The same Victor Hale who had supposedly been hiding for decades. The same Victor Hale connected to Ethan. Victor had known Daniel long before either man entered prison. Mark quickly called the lead investigator. Within hours, a new task force was assembled. The theory was simple. Daniel Brooks wasn't a random inmate. He had been connected to Victor's operation. Perhaps he knew where additional evidence was hidden. Perhaps he knew about the tunnels. Or perhaps he knew something even bigger. 3 days later, another breakthrough arrived. Investigators examined the map again. This time, they noticed tiny markings hidden along several tunnel routes. At first they looked like random numbers. Then someone realized they were coordinates. Geographic coordinates. Locations. Dozens of them. The team began checking each one. Most pointed to abandoned buildings. Old warehouses. Vacant lots. Storage facilities. Nothing seemed connected. Until they reached one location. An abandoned train station nearly 50 miles from Blackridge. Police searched the site. What they discovered shocked everyone. Deep beneath the station sat a hidden room. The room looked almost identical to the secret chamber beneath Blackridge. Old newspaper clippings covered the walls. Photographs covered tables. Maps hung from bulletin boards. Someone had been conducting surveillance. 4 years. Maybe decades. Mark entered carefully. Dust covered everything. The room appeared abandoned. Yet one object looked brand new. A small digital recorder. Its battery was still charged. Someone had used it recently. Mark pressed play. Static filled the room. Then a voice emerged. The voice was old. Calm. Deliberate. Every investigator froze. Because they recognized it instantly. Victor Hale. If you're hearing this, the recording said, then Daniel has already disappeared. Nobody spoke. The room fell completely silent. Victor continued. I always knew someone would find this place. Mark's pulse quickened. The recording had been made only weeks earlier. Victor somehow knew what was going to happen. Then Victor said something that made the entire room uneasy. Ethan Carter thinks he discovered the truth. A brief pause followed. Then came the next sentence. He only discovered the first layer. Several investigators exchanged nervous looks. Victor continued speaking. The tunnels are not the secret. The room suddenly felt colder. The money is not the secret. Another pause. The prison is not the secret. Mark felt a knot forming in his stomach. Then Victor said the one sentence nobody was prepared to hear. The real secret has been hiding in plain sight for 30 years. The recording ended. Click. Silence. Nobody moved. Nobody knew what Victor meant. But one thing had become clear. Everything they uncovered during the Cell 47 investigation had only scratched the surface. As investigators prepared to leave the hidden room, one officer called out from the far corner. I found something. Everyone rushed over. The officer pointed toward a dusty wall. At first it looked blank. Then Mark shined his flashlight across it. Words slowly appeared. Dozens of names. Hundreds of names. Written across the wall. Each one accompanied by a date. Some dates were decades old. Others were recent. Many names had been crossed out. But one stood untouched. One name stood alone at the very center. Mark stepped closer. His breath caught in his throat. Because the name wasn't Daniel Brooks. It wasn't Victor Hale. And it wasn't Ethan Carter. The name written in the center of the wall was Mark Lewis. And beside it was tomorrow's date. The room became completely silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed. Officer Mark Lewis stared at the wall. His name. His own name. Written in the center of hundreds of other names. And beside it was tomorrow's date. For several seconds, he could not move. This has to be some kind of joke, one investigator said. But nobody laughed. because the room did not feel like a joke. It felt planned. Very carefully planned. Mark stepped closer. The writing looked old. Some names had faded with age. Others looked newer. But his name was fresh. Almost recent. As if someone had written it only weeks ago. "Take photographs of everything," the lead investigator ordered. The team immediately got to work. Meanwhile, Mark continued studying the wall. Most of the crossed-out names belonged to people connected to old investigations. Police officers, lawyers, accountants, prison employees, criminals, even judges. The list made no sense. At least not yet. Then Mark noticed something. One of the names seemed familiar. Very familiar. He pulled out his phone and searched through old case files. A few moments later, his stomach tightened. The name belonged to a prison guard who had disappeared 26 years earlier. Nobody had ever found him. His case remained unsolved. Mark quickly checked another name. Same result. Missing. Then another. Missing. And another. Missing. A cold feeling spread through the room. The names on the wall were not random. Many belonged to people who had vanished without explanation. People the public had forgotten. People whose cases were never solved. Suddenly, one investigator spoke. "Mark." He turned. The investigator held up a folder discovered inside an old cabinet. The cover contained only one word. Observers. Nobody knew what it meant. Carefully, Mark opened the folder. Inside were dozens of reports, photographs, schedules, personal information, surveillance notes. Every page focused on a different person. The strange part was who those people were. None of them were criminals. Most were ordinary citizens, teachers, mechanics, security guards, office workers, normal people. The reports tracked their movements for years. Someone had been watching them very closely. One photograph made Mark freeze. The picture showed him standing outside a grocery store. The image had been taken nearly 10 years earlier, long before the Cell 47 case, long before Victor Hale's arrest, long before any of this. Mark slowly turned the photograph over. A note had been written on the back. Subject remains unaware. Mark felt sick. Someone had been watching him for years. The question was why. That evening, the investigation team returned to Blackridge. Nobody wanted to say it out loud. But everyone was thinking the same thing. Victor Hale had not been running the operation. He had been working for it. The hidden rooms. The surveillance files. The missing people. They pointed toward something much larger. Something older. And someone was still active. Back at the prison, Mark visited Ethan Carter again. This time, he brought photographs from the hidden room. The moment Ethan saw the wall of names, his expression changed. "You found it." Mark stared at him. "You knew about this?" Ethan looked away. "I suspected." "You suspected?" "I never found the room." "Then how did you know?" Ethan remained silent. Mark slammed the photographs onto the table. "My name is on that wall." Ethan finally looked up. His face was full of regret. "I know." The answer stunned Mark. "You knew?" Ethan nodded. "Not at first." "Then when?" "After Victor was arrested." The room became quiet. For several moments, neither man spoke. Finally, Ethan took a deep breath. "There was another notebook." Mark frowned. "What notebook?" "The one Victor never found." Mark leaned forward. "What was inside?" Ethan hesitated. Then he answered. "Names." The same answer sent a chill through Mark. "Names of who?" "People being watched." Mark's heart pounded. "Like the wall." Ethan nodded. "The wall came first." Everything suddenly started fitting together. The names. The surveillance. The disappearances. The hidden rooms. Someone had been collecting information for decades. But why? That question remained unanswered. Then Ethan revealed something even worse. The notebook ended with a warning. What warning? Ethan's eyes locked onto Mark's. If your name appears, leave. Mark stared. What? Leave? Ethan, I'm serious. The fear in Ethan's voice was impossible to ignore. Then he added 4 words. They always come back. Those words stayed in Mark's head long after the meeting ended. That night, he returned home. For the first time in years, he checked every lock twice. Every window. Every door. The entire house felt different. He told himself he was overreacting. Told himself the investigation was getting into his head. Then he noticed something unusual. A small envelope sitting on his kitchen table. Mark froze. He lived alone. Nobody should have been inside. Slowly, he approached. The envelope contained no stamp, no address, no return name, only a single sheet of paper. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a photograph. A recent photograph, taken only hours earlier. The picture showed Mark leaving Blackridge State Prison. Someone had been watching him today. Written across the bottom was a short message. You looked underground. Now we're looking at you. Mark's pulse raced. He immediately searched the house. Every room. Every closet. Every window. Nothing. Nobody was there. Yet someone had entered. Someone had left the envelope. Someone knew where he lived. For the first time since the investigation began, Mark felt truly afraid. He barely slept that night. The next morning, he arrived at the task force office before sunrise. Several investigators were already there. Their expressions were grim. Something had happened. What is it? Mark asked. Nobody answered immediately. Finally, the lead investigator handed him a report. Mark looked down. His blood ran cold. Because sometime during the night, another person had disappeared. No signs of struggle. No witnesses. No explanation. But this disappearance was different. This wasn't a criminal. This wasn't an inmate. This wasn't someone connected to Victor Hale. It was the maintenance worker who had discovered Ethan's hidden map. And on his empty desk, investigators found a single note. A note containing only one sentence. The appointment has begun. Those 4 words echoed through the task force office. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Officer Mark Lewis stared at the note found on the maintenance worker's desk. The same maintenance worker who had discovered Ethan Carter's hidden map. Now he was gone. Just like Daniel Brooks. Just like the names on the wall. Vanished. Without explanation. Without witnesses. Without a trace. The room felt colder than before. The lead investigator finally broke the silence. We need to assume these disappearances are connected. Nobody disagreed. There were too many similarities. Too many warnings. Too many secrets. Mark stared at the report in his hands. Then another realization struck him. The date beside his name on the wall. Today. Today was the date. The appointment had begun. For the first time, Mark wondered if Ethan had been right. Maybe he should have walked away. Maybe he should have stopped investigating. But it was too late for that now. Too many people had disappeared. Too many questions remained unanswered. That afternoon, investigators reviewed every piece of evidence collected so far. The wall of names. The hidden rooms. Victor Hale's recordings. The surveillance files. The anonymous photograph left in Mark's home. Hours passed. Then one analyst noticed something unusual. A pattern. The dates beside the names. At first they appeared random. But when arranged in order, they revealed something strange. Each disappearance happened exactly 30 days after a specific event. Nobody understood why. Until the analyst compared the dates to prison records. The answer shocked everyone. Every missing person had visited Blackridge State Prison exactly 30 days before disappearing. The room became silent. The prison wasn't simply connected to the mystery. The prison was at the center of it. Then another discovery followed. One name on the wall had never disappeared. The person had visited Blackridge. The date matched. Everything fit. Yet the individual remained alive. Mark immediately ordered investigators to locate him. His name was Samuel Reed, 72 years old, retired electrician, living alone in a small town 3 hours away. By evening, Mark and 2 investigators arrived at Samuel's house. The place looked ordinary. A small white home, neatly maintained yard, quiet neighborhood. Nothing seemed unusual. Mark knocked on the front door. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. The house appeared empty. Then one investigator noticed something. The front door wasn't fully closed. A small gap remained. Mark slowly pushed it open. The 3 men entered carefully. The living room was neat. The kitchen was clean. Nothing looked disturbed. Yet an uneasy feeling filled the house. Then they heard a sound. A weak voice. Coming from upstairs. Mark rushed toward it. At the end of the hallway sat an elderly man. Samuel Reed. Alive. But terrified. The moment he saw Mark, Samuel stood up. "You shouldn't be here." Mark froze. The words sounded familiar. Very familiar. Almost identical to Ethan's warning. "We need answers," Mark said. Samuel shook his head. "No. You need to leave." Mark stepped closer. "Your name was on the wall." Samuel's face immediately changed. Fear flooded his eyes. "You found the wall?" Mark nodded. For several seconds, Samuel simply stared. Then he whispered something. A sentence that made Mark's stomach tighten. "They're behind schedule." "What?" Samuel looked toward the window. "They're never behind schedule." The statement made no sense. "Who are they?" Mark asked. Samuel laughed nervously. Not because anything was funny. Because he was scared. Very scared. Then he finally told them the truth. Or at least part of it. 30 years earlier, Samuel had worked on maintenance projects beneath Blackridge. Not inside the prison. Beneath it. Deep underground. Far below the tunnels everyone already knew about. At first, he believed he was helping construct storage areas. But eventually he realized something was wrong. Very wrong. Workers disappeared. Projects changed. Records vanished. People stopped asking questions. Then one day Samuel discovered a room. A room hidden deeper than anything investigators had found so far. "What was inside?" Mark asked. Samuel's hands began shaking. "I only looked once." "What did you see?" Samuel swallowed. "A control room." The investigators exchanged confused looks. "A control room?" Samuel nodded. "Filled with files." "What kind of files?" Samuel's voice dropped to a whisper. "Files on thousands of people." Mark felt his pulse quicken. Thousands. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands. Then Samuel revealed something even worse. The files weren't about criminals. They were about ordinary people. Teachers. Doctors. Police officers. Workers. Neighbors. Entire lives documented. Every movement. Every address. Every friend. Every habit. As if someone had been quietly watching them for years. Who was collecting the information? Mark asked. Samuel immediately shook his head. "I never found out." "Why not?" "Because the next day everyone who worked there disappeared." Silence filled the room. Mark felt a chill run through him. Samuel continued. "I ran. And they never found you." Samuel looked away. "They found me." The answer stunned everyone. What happened? Samuel slowly lifted his sleeve. A small symbol had been tattooed on his arm. A symbol Mark had never seen before. A circle. Inside the circle sat a single eye. The moment Mark saw it, his heart skipped a beat. Because he had seen the same symbol before. Inside Victor Hale's hidden room. Barely visible in the corner of an old photograph. The same symbol. The same eye. Samuel noticed Mark's reaction. "You've seen it." Mark nodded. Samuel closed his eyes. Then he delivered the most terrifying revelation yet. Victor Hale wasn't running from them. The room became silent. He was working for them. Mark felt the floor disappear beneath him. Everything they believed was wrong. Victor had never been the mastermind. He had been a messenger, a servant, a small piece of something much larger. Then suddenly a loud crash echoed from downstairs. Everyone froze. Another crash followed. Glass breaking. Someone had entered the house. Mark immediately drew his flashlight. The investigators moved toward the stairs. Slowly, carefully. The house had become completely silent. No voices. No footsteps. Nothing. They reached the first floor. The front door stood wide open. Cold air drifted inside. But nobody was there. Then one investigator pointed toward the kitchen table. A new envelope sat in the center. It had not been there before. Mark felt his stomach drop. Someone had entered while they were upstairs. Someone had left another message. And somehow nobody had seen them. Slowly, Mark opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. A photograph taken only minutes earlier. The picture showed all four men standing upstairs inside Samuel Reed's house. Someone had photographed them through a window. While they were talking. While they were discussing the secret. While they thought they were alone. On the back of the photograph were 6 words. The final appointment is tomorrow. And beneath the message was one name. Ethan Carter. The sentence stayed in Mark Lewis's mind like a warning that refused to disappear. The appointment has begun. He read it again and again, hoping it would start making sense. It did not. By the time he reached the task force office, the entire building was already in chaos. Maps were spread across tables. Phones were ringing non-stop. Investigators were moving quickly between rooms. Something bigger than anyone expected was happening. And it was happening fast. The lead investigator looked up as Mark entered. "We have a situation," he said. Mark already knew that. "What now?" Mark asked. The investigator handed him another report. "This." Mark scanned it. His eyes widened. Another disappearance. This time, it was Daniel Brooks again. But that made no sense. Daniel had already vanished once. He had been confirmed missing from custody. So how could he disappear again? Mark's mind raced. "This isn't possible," he said. The investigator shook his head. "Security cameras show he was never found." Mark froze. "What?" "We checked everything again. There is no proof he ever reappeared after the first disappearance." Mark felt his chest tighten. It was like reality itself was breaking apart. Then another officer spoke from the far side of the room. "You need to see this." Everyone turned. The officer pointed at a screen. Surveillance footage from a highway camera had just been recovered. It showed a moving vehicle late at night. A black van. No license plates. Inside the van were silhouettes of people. But one detail made Mark step closer. In the front seat, partially visible, was Ethan Carter. Mark shook his head. "That's impossible." But the footage continued. The van stopped near an abandoned industrial site. The doors opened. Ethan stepped out. But something was wrong. He was not alone. Standing beside him was someone Mark recognized instantly. Victor Hale. The man who had already been arrested. The man who was supposed to be in maximum security custody. Mark felt his stomach drop. "How?" he whispered. No one answered. The footage ended. Silence filled the room. Then the lead investigator spoke slowly. "We think the Victor Hale we arrested was not the real one." The words hit like a shockwave. Mark stared at him. "What are you saying?" "We think there were multiple identities. Multiple men using the same name." The idea was unbelievable. But after everything Mark had seen, it no longer felt impossible. The hidden tunnels. The surveillance rooms. The disappearing inmates. The names on the wall. The warnings. It was all connected. But not to one man. To something larger. Something organized. Something still active. Mark suddenly remembered Ethan's warning. "They always come back." At that moment, a loud crash echoed through the building. Glass shattered in the hallway. People screamed. Alarms began to sound again. Mark rushed outside. The front entrance was broken. A black envelope lay on the floor, just like the one in his house. He slowly picked it up. Inside was a photograph. This one showed the entire task force building, taken from above. And in the center of the image was Mark, crossed out. Beneath it was a final message. You are now part of the appointment. Behind him, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. Mark turned around. But the corridor was empty. Then the lights went out. Total darkness. And somewhere inside the building, a voice spoke through the speakers. Come. Familiar. Ethan's voice. The real secret is not under the prison. A pause. It is inside the system. Static filled the room. Then silence. When the emergency lights came back on, Mark was standing alone. The hallway was empty. No signs of who spoke. No signs of who broke in. No signs of who left the message. Only one thing remained certain. This was not the end of the investigation. It was the beginning of something far bigger. And somewhere, far beyond Blackridge State Prison, the real network was still watching. Still waiting. And now, they knew Mark Lewis had found them. Far away, in an unknown location, a phone rang. A man picked it up. A voice on the other end spoke only 3 words. He noticed us. The man paused, then replied quietly. Then begin Phase 2. The call ended, and in a sealed underground room, dozens of monitors flickered to life. Each screen showed a different target, all of them connected to the Cell 47 investigation, including Mark Lewis. One by one, names began to glow on the wall. And this time, the list was expanding, not shrinking. The system was still active, and Mark Lewis had just been officially added.